On the morning of May 19th, 1536, a French swordsman stood in the center of the Tower of London. His blade, sharper than any English axe, glinted in the pale dawn light. Before him knelt a woman who had once ruled England, whose dark eyes had captivated a king and shattered a religion. Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, was about to lose her head. But this wasn't just an execution. It was the final act of a conspiracy so twisted, so ruthless, that it would echo through the centuries as one of history's darkest royal betrayals. How did a commoner's daughter seduce the most powerful king in Europe? How did she rise from courtier to queen and then fall so far that even her own uncle would condemn her to death? And were the charges against her real? Or were they the lies of desperate men determined to destroy her? Welcome to Dark Ages Chronicles. Today we descend into the shadows of Tudor England, where love became obsession, power became poison, and a queen's head rolled in the name of politics. This is the story of Anne Boleyn, the woman who changed England forever and paid for it with her life. To understand Anne Boleyn's execution, we must first understand her power, and that power began with seduction. In 1522, Anne returned to England after years at the French court. She was not a conventional beauty. Contemporary accounts describe her as having a dark complexion, black hair, and eyes so penetrating that they seemed to see through men's souls. Some whispered she had a sixth finger on her left hand and a strange mole on her neck, marks that, in more superstitious times, could be called signs of witchcraft. But Anne possessed something far more dangerous than beauty. She had intelligence, wit, and an uncanny ability to keep men wanting what they could not have. King Henry VIII, already married to Catherine of Aragon for nearly 20 years, noticed Anne immediately. He was used to getting what he wanted. His sister's lady-in-waiting would be a simple conquest. But Anne Boleyn refused him. While other women fell at Henry's feet, Anne kept him at arm's length. She would flirt, dance, laugh at his jokes, but she would not become his mistress. Her sister Mary had already been Henry's lover and been cast aside with nothing. Anne had learned from that mistake. She told the king, "I will give you nothing unless you make me your queen." Henry became obsessed. He wrote her 17 love letters, letters so passionate, so desperate, that they survive to this day as evidence of a king's madness for a woman. But there was a problem. Henry was already married, and the Pope would not grant him a divorce, so Henry did the unthinkable. He broke with Rome entirely, declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, and tore his kingdom apart. It's all for Anne Boleyn. In January 1533, Anne finally gave herself to Henry. By September, she was crowned Queen of England in a ceremony more magnificent than any in living memory. The impossible had happened. The commoner's daughter wore England's crown. But the price of that crown would be her head. Queen Anne's reign began with promise and ended in nightmare. She gave birth to a daughter in September 1533. Henry had wanted a son. He hid his disappointment, but the court noticed. They named the child Elizabeth, and few could have guessed that this baby girl would one day become England's greatest monarch. Anne was not content to be a decorative queen. She involved herself in religious reform, promoted Protestant ideas, and placed her supporters in positions of power. She made enemies, powerful enemies. The old Catholic nobility despised her as a heretic. The common people, who loved Catherine of Aragon, called Anne the king's whore and worse. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, had helped engineer Anne's rise. But Cromwell was a pragmatist. He served the king, not the queen. And when Anne opposed his foreign policy, he began to see her as a problem to be solved. Then came the miscarriages. In 1534, Anne lost a child. In January 1536, on the very day Catherine of Aragon was buried, Anne miscarried again, a son this time. Henry was devastated. He began to whisper that God was punishing him. Perhaps this marriage, like the last, was cursed. Anne's position grew precarious. Henry's eye began to wander. A new face caught his attention. Jane Seymour, one of Anne's own ladies-in-waiting. Young, meek, submissive, everything Anne was not. The vultures began to circle. On May 2nd, 1536, Anne Boleyn was arrested during a jousting tournament and taken to the Tower of London, the same place where she prepared for her coronation just 3 years before. This time she arrived as a prisoner. The charges? Adultery with 5 men, including her own brother, George Boleyn, conspiracy to murder the king, and witchcraft. The accusations were monstrous, unthinkable, and almost certainly false. But in Tudor England, truth was whatever the king needed it to be. Let's be clear about what happened to Anne Boleyn. This was not justice. This was murder dressed in legal robes. Thomas Cromwell orchestrated the entire plot. He needed Anne gone. She opposed his policies. She had made too many enemies. And most importantly, Henry wanted her gone. So Cromwell gave the king what he wanted, a legal excuse to kill his wife. The 5 men accused alongside Anne were tortured until they confessed to crimes that never happened. Mark Smeaton, a court musician, was racked until he said he'd slept with the Queen. The others, Henry Norris, William Brereton, Francis Weston, and even Anne's own brother George, maintained their innocence, but it didn't matter. The trial was a farce. Anne's uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, presided over the proceedings. 26 peers found her guilty. The sentence, death by burning or beheading at the king's pleasure. Henry, in his mercy, chose beheading. He even sent to France for an expert swordsman rather than using an English axe. It was said this would make the execution quicker, cleaner, more humane. How generous of him. But what of the rumors, the whispers of witchcraft, of unnatural powers? Some said Anne had bewitched Henry with spells and potions. Others claimed she'd conspired with dark forces to miscarry male heirs because they were not Henry's children. There were even rumors she'd been intimate with dozens of men at court, a sexual deviant whose appetites knew no bounds. These stories spread like plague through London. The common people, already predisposed to hate her, believed them all. Anne Boleyn became a monster in the public imagination, a witch, a whore, a traitor. But historians today see the truth. The charges were fabricated. The evidence was coerced. The trial was predetermined. Anne Boleyn's real crime was failing to give Henry VIII a son. Everything else was just decoration on a political execution. On May 17, 1536, 5 men were beheaded on Tower Hill. 2 days later, it would be Anne's turn. On the morning of May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn, dressed in a gray damask gown trimmed with fur, with a white linen shift beneath. She wore a crimson underskirt, the color of martyrs. Her dark hair was bound up beneath a white coif, leaving her neck exposed. She walked calmly to the scaffold within the Tower grounds. Unlike most executions, this one was private. Only select witnesses were allowed. Henry didn't want a public spectacle that might generate sympathy for his condemned queen. Anne addressed the small crowd with remarkable composure. She did not protest her innocence, nor did she condemn the king. Whether this was courage, calculation, or concern for her daughter Elizabeth's future, we'll never know. "Good Christian people," she said, "I am come hither to do according to law, for by the law I am judged to die, and therefore I will speak nothing against it. I pray God save the king and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never, and to me he was ever a good, a gentle, and sovereign lord." Some historians see this as a final act of dignity. Others see it as tragic irony, praising the man who murdered her. Perhaps it was both. Anne knelt upright, as was the French custom. She removed her headdress herself, revealing her long dark hair. A blindfold was tied around her eyes. According to witnesses, she kept repeating, "To Jesus Christ I commend my soul. Lord Jesus, receive my soul." The French swordsman had hidden his blade in the straw nearby. While Anne was distracted, looking for the sword, he drew it silently and in one swift motion severed her head from her body. She never saw it coming. Anne Boleyn died at approximately 9 a.m. She was somewhere between 28 and 36 years old. Her exact birth date is unknown. Her body and head were placed in an arrow chest. No proper coffin had been prepared, and buried in an unmarked grave in the chapel of St. Peter at Vincula within the tower. The day after Anne's execution, Henry VIII became engaged to Jane Seymour. They married 10 days later. Anne Boleyn's story doesn't end with her death. In many ways, it begins there. Her daughter Elizabeth would become Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen who ruled England for 45 years and transformed it into a global power. Elizabeth never married, never took a consort. Some historians believe she learned from her mother's fate. Marriage could be fatal for a woman with power. Anne's execution also revealed the brutal machinery of Tudor politics. She was not the last of Henry's wives to be executed. Catherine Howard would follow her to the block just 5 years later. Henry VIII's reign became synonymous with paranoia, tyranny, and blood. But Anne Boleyn became something more than a cautionary tale. She became a legend. Was she the seductive temptress who destroyed a kingdom's faith? The innocent victim of political conspiracy? The ambitious schemer whose hunger for power led to her doom? Or all of these at once? The truth is, we may never fully know Anne Boleyn. The historical record was written by her enemies, her image shaped by centuries of propaganda and revision. She remains an enigma, a dark queen whose true face is hidden behind layers of myth and rumor. What we do know is this: Anne Boleyn changed England forever. The break with Rome, the birth of the Church of England, the religious upheaval that would define British history for centuries. All of it can be traced back to one woman's refusal to become a king's mistress. She gambled everything on a crown. For 3 years she won. Then the wheel of fortune turned, as it always does in the halls of power, and she lost everything, including her head. Today, visitors to the Tower of London report strange occurrences near the chapel of St. Peter at Vincula. Some claim to see a woman in Tudor dress walking with her head tucked under her arm. Others speak of a presence near the scaffold site, a cold spot on the warmest days, a feeling of being watched. Perhaps it's just legend, or perhaps Anne Boleyn still haunts the place where she died, a restless spirit unable to forgive the betrayal that ended her life. One thing is certain: 500 years later, we still can't stop talking about her. The woman who seduced a king, defied a pope, and died on a scaffold has achieved a kind of immortality that neither Henry nor her enemies could have imagined. Anne Boleyn lost her head, but she won her place in history. This has been Dark Ages Chronicles. If you enjoyed this descent into Tudor darkness, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell. Leave a comment below. Was Anne Boleyn guilty, or was she the victim of the ultimate conspiracy? Next time, we'll explore another dark chapter from history's bloodiest pages. Until then, remember that in the Game of Thrones, you win or you die, and Anne Boleyn died.